Well, hello everybody. This meeting is being recorded. We will send you a link to all who have registered, and later we will post this recording on our website at volunteerhospice.org. I would ask you to remain muted, and you can use the chat button if you have any questions or technical issues. My name is Astrid Raffin-Pelloz. I'm very excited to offer this soul care program today with Elizabeth Miller from Happy Healthy Caregiver. And just saying the name of a company makes me smile. It's, I think it's a great name for this difficult profession. I want to give you a bit of history first on our hospice. Volunteer Hospice of Clarendon County was founded in 1978 by Rose Crum, a nurse. We are in Washington State on the Olympic Peninsula, and we are truly a unicorn in the hospice world. We are local, independent, nonprofit, and we offer palliative care and hospice care without billing government agencies such as Medicare, Medicaid, without billing private insurance companies, or without ever billing the patients. All our services are entirely free. Our income is mostly from donations and grants, a few grants. Our services and our programs are open to the entire community. We have a medical equipment lending closet, grief and bereavement programs, and this soul care program, which has the speaker series, as we are doing today, and monthly desk cafes called Tea to Die For. And we recently started a new Tea to Die For at Studio Bob in Port Angeles, for those of you who live around here. The next speaker series will be November 8th, I believe, the second Wednesday of the month, on caregiving as well, but from a very different perspective with an organization called Wise Caregiving. Our talk today is titled Making Space for You in the Midst of Caregiving. And I want to offer my deepest appreciation to all caregivers out there. Whether you intended to become a caregiver and made it into your profession, or whether you found yourself in a caregiving position unexpectedly and suddenly, I want to extend my thanks for what you do. You are the invisible foundation holding together our current healthcare system. You are at the bottom of that. You are essential. And yet we are reaching, or maybe we already have reached, a tipping point in caregiving, because more and more people need care and less people are able to give care. So this talk today is very crucial. And I think it's going to remind us to help ourselves first. As you know, in the plane, as they say in the plane, put your oxygen mask on first before helping any other person. And even though it is counterintuitive, it is really what we need to do. Elizabeth Miller is here to give us support, strength, and strategies on how to weather this journey. Elizabeth is a family caregiver advocate, a speaker, an author, a certified caregiving consultant, and a certified senior advisor. Her experiences caring for aging parents with chronic and terminal illnesses and for a sibling with developmental disabilities inspired her to create Happy Healthy Caregiver, LLC, in 2015. Through her coaching services, speaking, award-winning podcast, her book, and online community, Elizabeth helps family caregivers infuse caregiving and self-care with their busy lives. She hosts the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast on the Whole Care Network. She's the author of Just for You, a daily self-care journal, and she facilitates support groups for family caregivers. Elizabeth, welcome. It is with great pleasure that we have you here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here today and share this with you. This is a topic I am certainly passionate about and have lots of experience, and I'm still living it, frankly. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we all can follow along with us as we talk about making space for you in the midst of caregiving, because it's a challenge. It's a challenge that I'm, still being intentional about in my day-to-day life now. But I know that we've got a mixed group here of some volunteers, and we have some families as well. And I'm just wondering, for those of you who are family caregivers out there, if any of you actually had caregiving, family caregiving on your bucket list. I know I didn't. I was not prepared. This is not something that we learn in our academic years. And yet it was very life-changing and is still life-changing for me in many ways. So we'll wrap that up and how it has been life-changing toward the end here. But I want to share with you in today's session is, my like to echo what Astrid had shared, is that my hope for you today is that you feel seen and you feel supported. Maybe you're feeling a bit weary today. That's completely understandable. I'm glad you're here. And I'm going to take us on a journey over the next hour together to infuse some ideas, some stories, and some grace, a lot of grace actually. And there will be some time for Q&A at the end. So if you have, since we have a large group, if you have questions, maybe jot them down on a sheet of paper nearby, and we will be sure to get to those when we get at the end. But in the meantime, I invite you to use the chat feature in Zoom so that you can interact with each other, and you can certainly park your questions there as well, and we can circle back and get those. But I'm going to share a little bit about my caregiving story. I'm going to help, figure out how we can create this space for self-care, because we can't even think about self-care until we have the space for it, and how you can personalize your self-care space. And then, of course, some helpful tools and resources that have helped me and some of the clients and folks that I coach over the years. So we've got a lot to cover, but I always like to start first with the fact that I'm more than a caregiver, as all of you are more than a caregiver. I know Astrid and I were talking beforehand about the things that we like to do outside of helping other people. And, Astrid loves to make jams and jellies, which sounds really yummy and very appropriate for the shirt that I'm wearing today. And I love to travel and I love to try new things. And I've got other relationships besides my caregiving relationships. I've been married 29 years. I married my high school prom date. We have 2 young children who are both off of our payroll now, which is very exciting. I have worked for a Fortune 1000 company and led teams of people and made some impact there in a corporate world. And I enjoy my time with my family. I love watching movies and playing board games and reading books and doing some writing, and travel is one of my favorite things to do because I love it. I love a new adventure. But we are complex human beings, and I want to kind of rediscover who we are besides our caregiving role. And caregiving is a very important piece of us, but it is not all encompassing of who we are as human beings. So I've had a few different caregiving seasons, frankly. I have felt squeezed in what they call the sandwich generation a little over 10 years ago, working full time. And my parents have had chronic health conditions most of my adult life, but we affectionately called 2014 our spiral year, as things just started to kind of get out of control. The hospitalizations were coming closer to close together. The illnesses were becoming more serious. And we were not prepared for the impact and the spiral that was going to have in all corners of life, because we know when one person has a disease or an illness, it certainly impacts the entire family. I had a cornucopia of different emotions then. I felt isolated. I felt exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I was overwhelmed by the never-ending to-do list. I was a bit resentful because my parents had, made different life choices that may have put them in a caregiving situation, a lot sooner than we had anticipated as a family. I was certainly grieving what my old life looked like. And I felt like I was living life on a treadmill or a hamster wheel where it would never completely stop. Sometimes it would slow down, but there was always moving. I felt guilty and I burned out. And I think that that's a very common thing with those of us who are caring. I was caring at the time over 10 years ago for 3 older adults. My parents lived at a distance. So I'm in the Atlanta, Georgia area. My folks were retired, living in Florida. And my husband's parents were divorced, and my mother-in-law had lung cancer at the same time. So we were simultaneously squeezed and definitely identified with that cartoon image of what that looks like and potentially what that feels like. Sadly, in 2014, my husband and I both lost a parent. My mother-in-law passed away, and my father passed away, spent about a month, his last week of life on hospice. That was my first introduction to what hospice was like. And it was a very positive experience for us, and, have had different kind of hospice seasons throughout our journey. His in particular was at a hospice community. So a standalone building is where he spent the last week of his life. And we had a big celebration. Some was at virtual, some people were there in person. We had cake, we shared stories, and we had kind of a living celebration of life with my father in bedside, which was, I think, very unique. And the hospice volunteers were commenting on that. So my dad, which we see sometimes in older adult couples, is that my dad was the stronger of the two, where he was also caring for my mom, who had more complex comorbidities, they call it. And he was also caring for my brother, who's 8 years older than me. That's us in the bottom right-hand corner there. His name is Tom. He was born with an intellectual and developmental disability, and he's on the autism spectrum. So my dad was, caring for two individuals. So when he passed away, we had so many tasks that we needed to take care of. Of course, I don't even know that we got to the opportunity potentially to grieve his life in that moment. It was like blocking and tackling and making sure that mom was going to be okay, Tom was going to be okay. What do we do with this condo that they live in? And goodness, what do we do with all the stuff and the bills and so forth? So when loved ones get a diagnosis, I like to say that we also get a diagnosis and many times as a family caregiver, because it completely kind of it uproots our life and it takes over, and we are at a high risk for health impacts for ourselves. In fact, I would love it if our health professionals would even put that on our charts as a diagnosis, that, hey, this person is in a high stress situation, they are a family caregiver, and they are managing a lot of different emotions and stressors. So this is what inspired Happy Healthy Caregivers. I had to figure out, after moving my mom to Atlanta, she lived nearby in an assisted living community for a couple years while I was working full time, raising two kids at the time who were in middle school, along with my husband juggling care for his mom. And we were burning out and we weren't recognizing who we were in the mirror anymore. And I have health concerns of my own. I have hypothyroidism, which is an autoimmune disease. I deal with generalized anxiety. So, of course, those things kind of all got impacted as well. And I was noticing other health things in my life. I had a full face of acne. I was gaining lots of weight. I was, avoiding activities that I used to like, not doing the things that used to bring me joy. And that was part of what contributed to the burnout. And that's really what inspired Happy Healthy Caregiver. Is I got to a point where I thought, if I keep doing this, I'm going to potentially end up repeating the same cycle for my two children and my family. And frankly, it scared me. And we were like, we don't want to do this. My husband and I thought we've got to intentionally figure out how to make this work, how to make caregiving sustainable. You're going to hear me say that word a lot, sustainable. And so at first, what it looked like is using Instagram, frankly, as a photo journal for me. And I started doing 100 days of healthy and doing one little thing for myself every single day and posting it for accountability as well, to say, this is important to me. I need to figure this out. And sometimes it was little things like, phoning a friend or journaling, or maybe taking a walk around the track while my kids were at their practice. Maybe it was making a different food choice than I would typically make when I'm grabbing and taking things on the run, which we are often doing as caregivers. So that was kind of the impetus of Happy Healthy Caregiver, and saying, well, if I share my journey, maybe I can kind of bring this community of caregivers along with me. Fast forward to today, sadly, both of my parents are deceased. My mom's been passed away 5 years. She lived, by the way, her 2 years on hospice. She had home hospice. At some point, she came out of the assisted living community here in Georgia, moved in with my older sister who had the capacity. Her children were grown. She wanted to take mom in full time and lived the last 2 years of her life on hospice, and was a huge help for us as a family, where they came in to bathe my mom, the nurse came, the medications and the supplies were all, and it's really saved my sister in particular a lot of time, who was her full-time primary caregiver at that moment. So, yet another hospice story, and there are a few others that have been entwined with my mother-in-law and an aunt as well. So, current situation is that mom's been deceased 5 years. It's been over 10 years since my dad had passed away. And we as siblings, I'm one of 6 kids, my brother Tom needing care, and then there's five of us left. We are spread out along the East Coast. And like many families, I have, a brother that's not really showing up to the care team. And it's most of the care ends up falling on the 3 daughters, the 3 sisters in my family, and then one other brother that I have is very helpful as well. So we are sharing the care for my brother Tom, who lives about an hour away from me, with my other brother that is helpful, and I am his primary caregiver in Georgia that helps make appointments and find social activities and deal with the crisis of the day that he's dealing with at that point. So I'm still living it in many ways. So I always like to start with a little bit of data, because I want to spotlight that we're not alone in our care journeys. And this is actually the latest data from this year. So every 5 years so far, the AARP and the National Alliance of Caregiving has come up with new data. And this is where we are right now. We're at 63 million family caregivers in the US. And those are frankly the ones who identify as family caregivers, because I think there's still probably a large percentage who don't. So that's 1 in 4 adults that we know. No wonder we're exhausted. We're spending the equivalent of a part-time job on caring for another human being. And, 24% of this segment is carrying more than 40 hours a week, so a full-time job for them. It does tend to primarily fall on the females, so 61% being female, and many family caregivers are caring for more than one person at the same time. I think what surprises people too about this data, I know it surprised me when I saw it, is that caregivers are younger than people think that they are. Almost 44%, so not quite, half, but are under the age of 50 years old. And you can kind of see with the demographics there break down. And 70% of them are working while caregiving, and that number has gone up because it's more expensive to live than it ever has been. And so we're juggling career on top of all the other demands. And we're doing this with little to no training. Only 11% have said that they've had some kind of caregiver training. I know I have done things and experienced things that I never thought that I would be doing. I spent my professional career in IT, so nothing close to being a nurse or a social worker or a therapist. And so all of these things are part of the roles that we have that are demanding on us. So I'm just curious too, if you want to share in the chat, does this data surprise you? Like, do you see yourself in these numbers if you're the person who's caring for a loved one? And we will likely continue to see many of these numbers increase as people are living longer. Technology and medication is helping to people to live longer. We've got more baby boomers than we have younger generations, so we're outnumbered. And there's a lot of concerns. I do think we are beyond the tipping point, as Astrid said, for what this situation is like in the United States. My favorite quote by Rosalind Carter, she's a fellow Georgian, and she's been a big advocate for family caregivers throughout her lifetime, is that caregiving is not something that's just going to happen here and there, but we are all going to be impacted by caregiving at some point, because we've either been a caregiver, we are a caregiver, we will be, or we're going to need somebody to care for us. And so there's no escaping caregiving. It's a really important topic that is a human topic that we, that affects all of us. So Astrid did a great job in, introducing me here. But the main thing is that I believe in the support for family caregivers. I resigned from my corporate job in 2021 to, commit going all in on supporting family caregivers and have no regrets about doing so. So I want to talk about creating the space for self-care, because I don't know if you were like me, but I hated, and that's a strong word, but I think hated is the right word. I hated hearing you need to take care of yourself. Like, people say that. It just felt at the time when people said that to me that it was one more impossible to do to add to this overflowing to-do list already. I felt that. And when we hear this, we often feel like we're not doing enough, right? We're just constantly thinking, oh, one more thing I'm failing at. I'm not taking care of me either. But before we can even consider what we can do to prioritize our own health and happiness, we have to first create the space for it. Because until we have this space for it, we can't even visualize what that could potentially look like. So the definition of insanity, we know, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And there was a mindset shift that happened to me that needed to happen. I was seeing that I was repeating the same cycle, that I was becoming weary, that I was burning out, that I was not feeling like I was doing enough. And I could see that it felt like there was no end in sight at the time. And we feel guilty, and guilt is definitely a normal feeling. There's nothing I can say to you within this hour or ever that is going to dissipate the feelings of guilt, because we want to be all of these things for all of these people. We want to keep showing up for our jobs and our kids and our house and our relationships with our friends and our loved ones and our care recipient, our pets even. We want to do all of these things, and we just feel like we're falling short, and it usually means that we want something to be true that's not. So Astrid had mentioned the oxygen mask analogy, and that is definitely one that may help get caregivers to reset this mindset shift. But it was not working for me. And the reason why it wasn't working for me is that I felt like there wasn't a moment in my life where the lights were going to come on, the masks were going to drop from the ceiling, and then somebody was going to come over the speaker and say, now's the time you have to put your oxygen mask on before caring for the other people today. And I had to kind of figure out a better analogy that was going to work for me in this treadmill or this hamster wheel kind of life. And the one that I landed on is what I call feeding a nest of hungry birds. So pick your favorite bird. My favorite bird is the bluebird. And, picture this bluebird, this mama or daddy bluebird carrying over this nest, and all these little birds with their mouths wide open. And they're never happy, right? When you see a little nest of hungry birds, they're always demanding stuff. And the birds for me represented my job, my kids, my pets, my girlfriends that said they were never seeing anymore, my care recipient, my husband, and all of the things, my house, the things that were falling apart around the house. And I realized that they're never all going to be satiated, that somebody is always going to need something. And yet, as this mama bluebird, if I didn't go out and take some of that nourishment myself, I was not going to be able to keep flying back to this nest to take care of all of my hungry birds. And that's where it kind of clicked for me, like, oh, I'm part of this equation too. Like, I've got to nurture myself, not just physically, but also emotionally, so that I can keep showing up and that caregiving can be sustainable in my life. So it was a very important mindset shift that I wanted to focus on, because I feel like that is the foundation that you to adopt and to accept before you can even start to create the space and make the space for your own health and happiness. So feeding a nest of hungry birds, I hope that visual sticks with you and helps you in this. And so, I knew my way wasn't working. At first, when my mom moved to Atlanta, I was all in. I felt like her happiness was on me. I was going to make it work in this community. I was going to help her with friends and get into the activities and figure it out. And it was going to be her person. But that was not sustainable as a person who was a mom and had a full-time job. So I had to step back and figure out what I could let go of. And I felt like caregiving was a big lesson in learning how to let go. And so the part of making the space for self-care for family caregivers and for caregivers in general is figuring out how we can share the care. And so we've got to assemble our care team. And for those of you who work out, jobs and or volunteering, like you do this in your work. You have these huge projects and you identify all the people that are going to help with the pieces, and you identify where you have the gaps and maybe you need to hire professional help, and you're going to align the tasks with people's strengths. And we're not going to give the tasks, where people are weak to those folks. So we're good at this in many of the areas of our life. And so putting the same kind of thought into caregiving and assembling a care team for our care recipient, and also for us to be our caregiver, our self-care cheerleaders and so forth. So, we think about family, and there's a lot of family dynamics, and you see one family, you've seen one family. Um, but there's a lot of sources for help out there. You all, as the community volunteers on this call, you are a part of this care team. Neighbors and friends of your loved one or yourself, distant relatives, your faith community, other professionals, maybe in the home care space or in other areas. And definitely your care recipient is part of your care team, because as we want them to be able to do as much for themselves as they possibly can, to give them purpose and to be involved as much as possible for as long as possible. That's good for them. It's healthy for them. And then there's all these other people, right, that are outside. And so they've got, a lot of feedback for you, maybe some strong opinions, but it's unsolicited advice. If they're not part of your core care team, then maybe it's just not a concern of theirs, and how you can politely say that. But setting up some healthy boundaries to say, look, we've got it. We've got a team of people. Thanks, thanks for your opinion, and leaving it at that. But the unsolicited advice is abundant, frankly, and a lot. But if they're not in the arena with you, it just does not hold the same weight. So sometimes too is, it's really common in the States these days and abroad where individuals don't live near the people that they're potentially taking care of. So we've got a package coming if you hear any dogs that are barking. But it's common these days where people are living at a distance. So in my situation, my brother lives an hour away from me. There was a time where my parents were 6 hours away from the closest family. So there are people on, within a family's care team that may be remote supporters, and there are many things that they can still do to support. So just because they're geographically not there doesn't mean that they can't have some kind of a role, because all the roles are appreciated. So even, social connection with a FaceTime or a call, or can really help, give some primary caregivers some respite, away to focus on a task. Being that cheerleader for the primary caregiver, sending surprises and gift cards in the mail, maybe dinners on them that night. Defining how often they're going to visit and when they're going to visit, so that we have some expectations of when people are going to show up. There's help with research, whether it's, finding other professionals, finding caregiver support. Maybe it's researching the next family vacation, paying bills, doing the paperwork. In my situation now with my brother, like, I'm the boots on the ground person for him, but I've got a sister in Michigan that's doing all the, the Medicare, Medicaid insurance paperwork. She pays the bills. I have a sister in DC. When my brother wrecked his car, she's researching where we can find a similar car so he doesn't have to relearn with his disability, something brand new. So there are a lot of things that people can help do from a distance. And this is all about making the space, like creating the white space for us, so that we can even think about how we can infuse more self-care in our lives. So I have a resource that I share with families that I work with that may be a good resource for you, or for some of the families that you all work with, because we likely had a full plate of stuff before caregiving entered our lives. And I want, as the family caregivers, them to be able to choose what things are falling off the plate. Where are the things that they want to focus and give their attention to? And sometimes it can be easier to delegate the family responsibilities, the household responsibilities, so that they have space for maybe they want to be more involved with the caregiver responsibilities. And so sometimes it can be easier to let go of some of those things. And this, having this mindset around dividing and conquer and aligning to people's strengths is, again, going to create more space in your life. It's going to free up more time for the caregiving that you're choosing to do and the self-care that you need to do to keep nourishing yourself. Another way that we can, make this sustainable, share the care, is having systems in place. We want to get our ducks in the row, so to speak. So the best way to prepare or to help prevent a potential crisis in a caregiving life is to have backups. For caregivers, we not only need a plan B, sometimes we need a C, D, and E, like multiple backup plans, in order for us to feel like we've got the space to take the respite. This needs to be in place. So getting ourselves organized, what that could look like is, one shared calendar that the care team is all looking at, for appointments and different things. Blocking out time, if you're somebody who's also working a job, blocking out time for you to be able to handle those caregiving tasks, because the caregiving doesn't stop during the workday. It overlaps into the 9 to 5s. And a place that we can put our important documents, our passwords, the things that people are asking the same question over and over again, can be a clue for us of the things that we may want to write down, so that we can easily share it with other people, and have that backup in place. The med list, the doctor's contact information, the checklists. And then setting up things where we can to be on auto pay, simplify, removing subscriptions, unsubscribing from emails and mail that comes in that we have to make more decisions on. So all of the things, for me as a caregiver, I felt like I wanted less to take care of. And so simplifying those things was really important, so that I could focus on what was important, that it matched with and aligned with my values. And then a lot of times, keeping some kind of care history notebook with your care recipient. For my mom, she had complex things going on. She had breathing treatments. We had to track her, her bowel movements. We had to know, if she took her meds and how her mood was that day, what her, pricking her finger, the blood test for her diabetes, what those numbers were. And so keeping that in allowed us to kind of see some trends and be able to have conversations, but to pass the baton off between caregivers, so that people knew, what was going on, and having that stay with mom was really, really important. Another way that we can share the care to make the space for self-care is to be open to using technology. There's a lot of things that are happening in this age tech space, that can be the eyes and ears potentially for caregivers, to allow them to be there without being there, to give them peace of mind, to help share the care with other people on the care team. So there are things like caregiver apps where we can, share updates and ask for requests for help. We can keep digital health journals. One resource for that is caringbridge.org. We use that a lot with my parents to keep my, very extensive family updated, because updating people is work and more tasks for us. There's the Thumbtack app that can do some little minor odd jobs, maybe some, handiwork that needs to be done around the home and things. There's emergency alert devices that we can use that gives us peace of mind, or maybe some remote monitoring. There's ones with video, there's one with heat sensors to protect people's privacy. There's all kinds of things happening there. There's ways that make it easier for us to communicate with our care recipients. Maybe they're not so good with technology. And so an easy way there's even one that you can hook up to their television screen, and you can pop in and be like, hey, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to check in on you and see if everything was okay. There's ways to know if they're, managing their meds the way that the doctors wanted them to, how to entertain themselves online with singing and connecting with other people. We know how important it is to not be socially isolated. And, obviously there's the things that we're maybe used to taking care, used to using in our lives now, such as Uber and Uber Eats and Amazon Subscribe and Save, and using our smartphone speakers to help order supplies and all of that. So I think technology is going to have a growing role in the care team, and it can really provide that peace of mind for us and help make our caregiving journey a little bit smoother, especially as we're going to continue to be outnumbered by the people who are going to need care. So with those things, we're hopefully dividing and conquering, we're expanding our care team, we're thinking about using technology, we've delegated some of that, and we've simplified and written our systems down. And those kinds of things then will make the space for us to think about how we can infuse more self-care in our life. Now we're ready. So the big thing I want to share here is I wanted to, we've got to personalize it, because what self-care looks like for me is not the same thing that it's going to look like for you. And in self-care, pre-caregiving life is not going to look the same thing as it looks like in a caregiving life. Oftentimes we have time constraints, we've got competing priorities, maybe our finances are different, overall less flexibility. So we've got to figure out, how we can make it work. One of the quintessential images of self-care is the bubble bath. And I've got a confession, I don't love a bubble bath. I find it that it's not relaxing for me. The pages get wet. My dogs are bugging me. I'm always like, do I wash my hair? Do I not wash my hair? Am I sitting in my own dirt? Like what? So it's just not for me. And it's an example of how we've got to, find the things that are gonna be meaningful to us. And when I started Happy Healthy Caregiver, I was really focused on physical self-care. And it made sense because, physical things was kind of put us in a caregiving situation with my parents in particular. So I was really fixated on eating right and exercising. But there are so many more types of self-care out there. Their physical is certainly one of them, but emotional. So things like processing your emotions through journaling, seeking laughter, practicing gratitude. Maybe it's spiritual. Maybe it's, you could be also journaling or doing a Bible study or spending time in nature or quiet time or doing some kind of yoga or meditation. Could be financial, like getting your budget in order, doing your power of attorneys, and doing some investing or charity give back that's going to align with your values. It could be professional. You're building your skill set. You're setting boundaries between your work and your caregiving life. You're taking your time off. You're getting the mentorship support you need, and those things. And then intellectual could be listening to a podcast to learn something new, advocating, understanding what hospice and palliative care is. So broadening what you know about the care space. Social, certainly, could be support or could be therapy, could be your time with your friends. And sometimes it's practical. Sometimes we just want to feel like we have more peace if we can get our desk organized and clear that off. Or maybe it's assigning the roles and responsibilities. So there's a lot of different types of self-care. And I think if we reframe it and look at it this way, I think we can stop beating ourselves up that we're not doing self-care. Like there's probably things that you are doing in these categories that maybe you never considered to be self-care that are. And so that can be one way that we feel like we're doing something there and that we're not doing enough. So my current definition of self-care is anything that's going to give me peace of mind, either so I can sleep better at night, anything that's going to energize me both physically and both emotionally and mentally, and anything that is just pure joy. So we need more of that in our life. We need those things. And so I'd love to, know if you have a different definition of self-care. You can kind of expand on that in the chat. But I think one of the things too that I thought is that I thought self-care had to take a lot of time. Like I felt like I needed big blocks of time for it. And what I found as a caregiver is that we can do these little micro acts of self-care in our day. And that it's not an either or, that we can be an amazing caregiver to somebody and we can be happy and healthy individuals. It's not a choice. We don't have to it's not choosing one way or the other, but it can be a yes and. So what does real self-care look like? Real self-care looks like, reframing what you're already doing, that we talked about that, broadening your definition. So what are these other categories besides eating right and exercising? How can we infuse some little micro acts of things that are going to give us that peace of mind or those joy? And what I really want us to do is develop a closet of tools, because just like our closets, we have things for different seasons and different occasions for different moods, and we try them on and we see how they're going to look on us, and if they're going to work for us personally. And it's the same thing when we're building our self-care tools, is that we've got choices and we need different things on different days. One of the biggest tips for real self-care for caregivers is to schedule the time. Schedule the time for themselves, put it at like a wellness visit on their calendar and commit to it, just like they would a doctor's appointment. Keep those promises to ourselves, because that is, those breaks are so necessary to, again, energize ourselves, to feel less resentment, and to keep showing up and make caregiving sustainable. And ultimately, I think we need to have a little more fun. I think, especially during a transition time, I think about those 2 years of my mom being bedridden on hospice. And it wasn't like I went to visit her and we were, all gloomy. We had some great, great times, during those years of hospice. We had some amazing coffee chats on the bedside. We, used my journal to have conversations. Her eyesight was diminishing. So my mom had written chapter books for young adults. We were reading her book, the books that she wrote. We were playing card games because she was bedridden. She just had a little space. We were doing Play-Doh. We were listening to music and dancing and making her laugh. We were inviting people to come in to do performances for her. And so we had to get really creative about the way that we were infusing joy, but there was still lots of joy in those years, for sure. So, it did drive me crazy when people and healthcare professionals would say, I call it shoulding on me, SHOULD, you should take care of yourself. And I felt like I was doing the best that I could, and no one really understood what it was really like as the life of a caregiver. And it was having an effect on me, and it was having a ripple effect on my immediate family. And what's important is that we are so good as caregivers to think about the care recipient and give them all the support that they need. But we as caregivers also need support for ourselves. So there are lots of places to go. It is a little fragmented, like our healthcare system. But I will say that the best day to find support as a caregiver is on your best day, because we want to be able to potentially prevent the next crisis, to have the group and the community there when we need people to lean on. So these are some of the resources that I wanted to share. There's caregiving specific coaches like myself, certified caregiving consultants. We're spread out across the US and beyond. There's virtual support groups, so there are one specific for different conditions. One of the nonprofits that I work with is a group called daughterhood.org that offers virtual support circles. And so I'm one of the leaders. We have topics, we have connection circles there. You can find local support, by Googling, caregiver support in the name of your area. Sometimes the disease specific organizations can provide support groups. Faith communities, maybe your place of employment has an employee resource group or an affinity group. There's areas, some of the area and agings have caregiver conferences and connections. And then certainly there are the places you can connect with other people or caregivers that aren't kind of under that caregiver support umbrella. I know one of the big places that I found a lot of support was in my book club, was my book club of women. Maybe if I didn't even read the book, but I had an outlet of women who understood kind of the dynamics of what was going on. I had a safe space where I could let these emotions out. But maybe your thing is cycling or knitting, or mahjong is something I've gotten into lately. But finding the places that you can kind of connect and maybe kind of have a twofer where you're doing something you enjoy as well. So I do feel like we're lacking about infusing more joy in our lives. And I love to do this activity with caregivers. I love to do this activity also with care recipients, because how can we infuse more joy in their life, especially in a transitioning stage? So I call this a fun sheet, not a worksheet, but thinking about the things that really are maybe small things that bring us joy. So for me, I love a wine flight. I love to taste little things. I love a pontoon ride. I love a sunset. I love bookstores. I love small town festivals. I love thrifting right now. A local coffee shop, movie popcorn. And did you know you can get the movie popcorn and you don't even have to stay for the movie? You can just go in and get it and bring it home. Outdoor hikes, trying new things. So all of these things can be part of our joy list. And then we can feel like we've got an opportunity to make some more of those things come true. And maybe there are even things that overlap with our care recipient where we can find activities that we can do together to infuse more joy in our life. Sometimes we have people asking us, let me know what I can do to help. And you can say, well, look, I'm looking to put more joy in my life. Is there anything here that you could help me, infuse? And what a nice to-do item to give somebody that they know they're going to come back and infuse some kind of happiness into your life. And this can be hard sometimes for caregivers. So I put some prompts here and some questions to think about that can kind of get people flowing and adding to their lists. So feel free to put one of your joys in the chat today. So, what does or can self-care look or feel like? So, taking some kind of an action is really is the antidote really to worry and fear. We want to kind of minimize some of those things that are kind of not productive emotions in many ways, and instead do something that we can take some action on. So I'm hoping that you've learned something from our chat here today, that you can, either infuse in your life or maybe share with a family to encourage and empower them to create the space for themselves in the midst of caregiving, and to figure out what they want to make as part of their closet of tools, what's part of their joy list, that they can infuse into their life to help make caregiving more sustainable for them. And that's going to be a win-win for everybody, frankly. That's going to be a win for the caregiver, the care recipient, you as the volunteers. That's the best that we can ask for, frankly. So I would love to stay connected. And, while caring was not on my bucket list as something I want to do when caring for my family, I wouldn't wish it away. I've learned so much about myself in the process of caring for different individuals, with resilience and patience. I keep having to learn the patience one over and over again. And certainly skills that have adapted to my professional career, how to manage a crisis, diplomacy, team building, decision making, problem solving, like all of these skills we learn through caregiving. And of course, those meaningful conversations and those times that I had with my parents that I may not have had, frankly, if that they were, we were kind of on our healthy tracks, living life. So in particular, some of those bedside chats with my mom, and even had the opportunity to interview her for the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast. So she knew what all of this was happening here. So I have a few resources. One is the journal. It's a prompted journal that helps people hopefully infuse some self-care in their life. It gives them ways to kind of put that focus back on their own health and happiness, written with caregivers in mind, but certainly not just for caregivers. The podcast has over 213, I think was the episode that dropped today. What makes this podcast different is I only interview real family caregivers who are sharing their strategies, their resources, and how they're able to infuse self-care into their life so that they can make their journey more sustainable. I do a free weekly newsletter. So every week I share something happy, something healthy, something care related. I know there's so many resources in this space. Astrid was just telling me the new one that I wrote down that I'm going to share in the newsletter about the Threshold Choir that she's a part of. What a great resource that people can take advantage of. And then I don't think it's too late, but if you're a cruiser and you want to join us for the Self-Care at Sea cruise, that is something that we're doing in October on the Norwegian cruise line. We're taking a group of caregivers who well-deserved respite there so that they can come back refreshed. And then here's my information. You can learn more at happyhealthycaregiver.com, and you can reach out to me. And I would love it if we just had some time here to interact and some questions, comments. Maybe we even have some in the chat already.
Well, I'm looking. Let's see. Yeah, somebody was wondering about the percentage of caregiver over 64, and I think that I found some resources online. That's about
Yes,
half.
I will pop that in I can share the resource that with the latest update.
Yeah, and I'm I'm kind of curious. I mean, there were lots of roles that you described and mentioned. When we're a caregiver, it encompasses nursing and bath aides and social worker, therapist, bookkeeper, possibly secretary, schedule
Taxi
coordinator,
driver.
taxi
Yeah.
driver, co-researcher. What else? Is there anything else that one of you maybe in the group here is doing that has not been mentioned at all? Maybe not. Don't be shy.
And I think the technology one is a big one these days too,
Yeah.
with the cyber safety stuff that's going on. I've had to hire someone right now to help me. A bot has, infiltrated my Google search where people aren't finding my website. So there's always something, like we've got to protect ourselves. And I think the older adults are really vulnerable there as well, and our teenagers. So there's a lot of stressor and conversation around that lately. I think sometimes, I don't know if I mentioned therapist. I felt like sometimes I was my mom's therapist, and finally had to kind of put a boundary there and say, Mom, I can't be your therapist. And sometimes she would have what I call her greatest hits album, where it was literally like, I knew what she was the same things were coming up over and over again. And she was just kind of going through the whole album. And I finally thought, like, I need to protect myself emotionally. I've got to set a boundary here. And so finding someone that she could talk to about her grief, about her caregiving, certainly the hospice chaplain there was a resource for us.
Yeah, and in all those roles that you mentioned, when we are a family caregiver, where does the daughter go? Where does the wife go? It's like how do we, sort of separate out,
Yeah, their lines are blurred for sure. In fact, that
Mhm.
was one of the pieces of advice that I got when I went to my first support meeting as a caregiver. I probably went through a box of Kleenex with this woman. Can hear her words even, and it's been, probably a dozen years now. But she said, I just said, I feel like my mom's just like bombarding me with tasks and all of that. And that was her advice, is to honor that relationship between mother and daughter. And she said, here's something you can try on, is when you go to see her, let her know that you can maybe do one or two things off of her to-do list for you, and that you want to do something fun together to have that mother-daughter time. So maybe we would, one of our shows was Frankie and Grace. We would watch that, or she loved to play bananagrams or Skip-Bo or her card games, or we would do adult coloring, or we would have a little picnic together, or some kind of a treat that we would share, but we would do something. And that really helped then feel less resentful too when I was going to visit, like, oh gosh, I'm just so many things. And it didn't mean I didn't sometimes feel sad, still kind of getting in the car and feeling like, oh my gosh, she still needed so many things that potentially didn't get to. But it's never ending. But I do think that was helpful, especially in the feelings of resentment for me in doing that, honoring that relationship.
Yeah, it is something we often hear here in our hospice, is that, it's often a family member with a caregiver, and they feel like they get lost in their original role, in their, who they are. And it's really something that we try to support as much as possible with our volunteers. Yeah.
Any joy? I see one joy out there that someone said is watching the sunset. I was wondering if
Yeah.
anything kind of triggered for you all, as far as like, oh, I never thought of this like small thing as something that, that you enjoy. I see your cat. Yes,
Yeah.
pets are amazing. We can learn a lot about self-care from our pets for sure. Like, they are good at doing nothing a lot of times, and
Yeah.
and just needing love.
Yeah.
And so that is certainly has been a source of joy for me.
Mhm. Yeah, me too, definitely. Yeah. And then, what else do we do for joy? I mean, yeah, we live here on the peninsula, on the Olympic Peninsula. It's absolutely gorgeous and beautiful, like many other places in the US, but we go hiking, and, just watching from a different perspective, climbing on a mountains you've never been on before, or even a hill, or looking at the sunset, like somebody mentioned, or it's absolutely gorgeous. Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes you can find treasures. Like I know I love to see like a nature-made heart in the wild, like maybe some kind of a shape on the sidewalk or a leaf or in a tree. Or if you're on the coast, like finding like sea glass or something can be super fun. Yeah, but that's why I'm enjoying thrifting right now, because it's like it's a little bit of a way to kind of go back to your past
Yeah.
and reconnect. You see stories, I see things that remind me of my grandma or my parents, or yeah, and just like finding little treasures. It's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we have a quiet audience today, but you shared a lot of information. One of the slides was on family caregivers' responsibilities and family responsibility. And I was, looking at all the things you listed, and I'm like, oh my God, I'd never even thought of that.
Yeah, and that's just the ones that fit in the screenshot. So
Yeah.
when they go to the website, and I see Diana shared it here, is that's the link that it goes to, the short link goes to, is like there's even a holiday one, because we don't think about all the responsibilities that surround the holidays, and we're kind of not far off from those things. But like for my mother-in-law, she was loved Halloween more than anybody. That's why I have her in the Dracula costume. And so decorating was a big part of what brought her joy, and going to see, the movies that were out and so forth. So we needed to make the space for that, to decorate, or to have the foods that people like, and my mom was, even when she was bedridden, she still wanted to gift buy for everybody, but she couldn't get out and about. So who got those tasks? It was stuff that kind of filtered down to the caregivers. And so in a way it was like, okay, Mom, how can we simplify this? What can we do maybe to make it, can everybody get the same thing? Can we use Amazon? Can we, different ways around that? So even the holiday task has its own sheet there, in addition to the family and the caregiving responsibilities. But a lot of times people are trying to do this as a solo caregiver, and if they're seeing their name on all the lines, I have not seen a solo caregiving situation be successful. It just doesn't work. And so we've got to kind of think about what are the things that we want to keep, and what are the things that we want to let go of, so that we get to decide, what's fallen off the edges.
Yeah, it makes me think a little bit of something called the ring theory, where the person in this case would be the caregiver, the main caregiver, the principal caregiver is at the center, and then next to it you have other caregiver who do maybe less important task, and then around that you have other caregiver who might be doing even less important task, whatever
Right.
that might be, like maybe eventually, taking care of the garden become less essential than walking the dog, than giving mom a bath, for example. And so you can have those circles of people, you can have those groups of people sort of helping each other by taking care of some responsibility that the main caregiver can then delegate.
Yeah. And there's peace of mind in that, knowing that someone else is owning that. Because I think sometimes these things just percolate in our brains, right? We're like, oh, I wonder about this and I wonder about that. And it's like, oh no, I don't own this. That insurance is not my category, or trash is not my thing. And we can kind of let go of those things. And if they do kind of fall, then it's maybe time to revisit and pull the team back together and say, hey, let's revisit this. Maybe some things have changed. Does everybody still jiving with their responsibilities, or do we need to shuffle some things around, or hire more help, or whatnot? But I think it gives us the ways to have these conversations and manage expectations a bit better.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. I want to read here what Rebecca wrote in the chat, which is really nice. She said, I really appreciated the suggestion to discuss what task one can complete with one's care recipient. So you have a tangible list you can both acknowledge. They may recognize more the activities you are doing for them, as well as acknowledging them for yourself. My mother-in-law, I think, had real trouble accepting that she needed help and had trouble with boundaries. So yeah, that's also important. You're very right, Rebecca, to share this with the person, getting all that support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like this is a big job. And I think sometimes as caregivers, we didn't necessarily talk about that, but it's like we got to let the cracks show of what's going on in our life a little bit in order for things to get to the light to get in and the light and the load. And
Right.
that requires vulnerability. And this maybe is a tool for that, saying, this is a lot for me. And oh, by the way, I've got my own house and my own kids and my own job or these other things that might be happening. And I'm there for you. I want to continue showing up, but I need help. And so we need to hire more help, or we need to do this. And so it can certainly help have those conversations. And sometimes those are, courageous conversations with tears involved, but they're essential.
Yeah, but they're essential. Yeah, and they can happen bits at a time. Elizabeth, I want to be mindful of your time. I know that you only had 1 hour to give us, and so I want to respect that, and we've reached the top of the hour. So I can stay on a little while if anybody has more questions. Otherwise, I will close this meeting in a couple of minutes, but I really appreciate what you did for us, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Wendy.
Nice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Thanks for all that you do to support your community.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.